Brains. Brains. Num 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 num.
Released in 2000, Uzumaki is a Japanese horror film adapted from the manga comic books of the same name. It was directed by Higuchinsuke, who is far from a prolific director, and he was ably assisted in terms of the visual look of the film, something which is of paramount importance to a film like this, by cinematographer Gen Kobayashi. The film was adapted from the manga by famous Japanese artist Junji Ito. However, the manga was actually running at the time and was not concluded by the time the film was made. Therefore, the film takes a drastically different approach to the source material. Uzumaki is what I would like to call a Marmite film. People will either love it or they'll hate it. I don't think there are many people that will actually be sitting in the middle ground and will say, oh yeah, it's okay. You're going to commit one way or the other, and it's because it's such a singular, peculiar film. Uzumaki takes place in the small Japanese town of Kurutsu. The film follows a teenage girl called Kairi who starts to notice some strange goings on in the town. Most specifically, she notices that some of the people within the town are starting to act a little bit peculiar. At the same time, Shuichi, I apologise if I don't get the pronunciations correct here, Shuichi, who is Kairi's best friend, starts to notice that his father has developed a really strange obsession with all things spiral. By that I mean that the father is obsessed with anything with spiral patterns in it. So, for example, there's a scene in the film where he's spinning and stirring a cup of soup and he's looking into it and he gets obsessed with the spiral vortex-like pattern that it creates. The father's personality therefore changes drastically, and we're led to believe that he was once a sort of loving, kind man, but this obsession with all things spiral has led him to the point where he's become almost like an addict and a shadow of his former self. As the film progresses, other people within the town start to develop the same fixation as Shuichi's father with all things spiral. They become obsessed when they see the pattern in any piece of nature or in any object. The film then continues as Kairi and Shuichi then try to investigate why this idea is spreading and why it's changing people's personalities. Along the way, they find some rather gruesome discoveries. There's some pretty horrific deaths, and the film builds up to what can only be labelled as an ambiguous climax. Now that's really as much as I want to say until we get to the spoiler section of the video with regards to the plot, because I really don't want to spoil the plot for anyone. Now, Uzumaki is a film that I had watched, or rather I'd read a lot of people sort of writing about it online. They were talking about the film. Now there seems to be quite a division of opinion with this film. Like I said, it's Marmite, you either love it or you hate it. My feelings on the film is that it's a singular film. I don't think I've seen anything that is quite like it, and probably for that reason I actually think it's brilliant. I think it's a phenomenal piece of work. There is an atmosphere in the film which I don't think I've really experienced while watching anything else. The direction in the film is very, very good, but it is very sort of haphazard. There's a lot of strange cuts, strange angles. The colour scheme of the film often mimics the frames that you would see within manga comic books, but I've also felt that some of the tinted frames that we see within the film, lend a lot to some of the shots that people like Argento has used in his films. You often hear people talk about a film being darkly comic. Now, when it comes to Uzumaki, it's the only film that I've seen really where I feel it creates a an atmosphere in the beginning of the film where the film is so ridiculous that you should really be laughing at it, but within that is this horrible sense of dread and impending doom. I've never really I've never really experienced that watching another film in the same way. In terms of Japanese cinema, I think the closest I could really relate it to is the film Cairo, where there's this impending sense of doom within the film, and also you don't really get a reasoning behind what's happening, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of people have trouble with Uzumaki, is that there's a lot of room to manoeuvre in terms of your interpretation of what's actually going on. While some films such as George Romero's Creepshow and Ang Lee's Hulk capture the visual style of a comic book, Uzumaki, I think, is probably the most successful film that I've watched that really encapsulates the atmosphere of reading a graphic novel. I think the like I said before, with the use of colours and the strange angles that are used within the film, lend themselves more to comic books than to actual cinema. But that's the thing. I think that the film also has an atmosphere of being a comic book film. Right from the get-go, things happen that just could only really happen within a comic book film, and it really creates that feeling that this is, you're watching a comic book. In terms of the narrative, it's quite haphazard. Now, it's not haphazard to the degree of something like Argento's work where nothing makes sense, but the film does shy away from explanations for some of the things that are going on, and I think part of that is due to the fact that the manga series hadn't been completed. Now, I haven't read the manga series, and reading a lot of people's comments online, it seems to be that people that read the manga series first, then watched the film, are actually really shocked by the film. They really don't enjoy it at all, because it goes in a very different route. I think the manga eventually gives different reasons for what's going on, and different conclusions to the characters, whereas the film is trying to pick little bits of what had already been done from the manga and put them together and then sort of put its own slant on it. I don't have a problem with that, simply because I think that anytime you jump from one medium to another medium, you can't expect to pull from it all of the conventions that work in one medium that won't work in another. You know, there's things you can do in comic books that won't quite work in films. But I think Uzumaki has a right good go at trying to replicate them. I think it's just that, obviously, with the manga not being finished, the makers of the film could then obviously take it in their own direction, and they obviously did. The bottom line with regards to a horror film is often, is it scary, is it frightening? And I would say absolutely. Uzumaki, I think, is very frightening. There are a few shock moments, there are some pretty gory scenes in it as well, but it's really the atmosphere that makes it frightening. And like I say, that is what makes it a singular film, because it has this sort of joyous exuberance of a film that should be light-hearted, a comic book movie, but the subject matter of what's happening to these people in this town, you know, there's something really horribly wrong, and that clash between those two emotions really creates a really individual piece of work. Like I say, I don't think I've ever experienced that to this degree. I mean, there are some films that you get obviously conflicting feelings about, but you know, something like this, it's so striking. The difference between what's happening in the town and the way it's presented are so different from one another that let us say, it really affects the viewer if you've been drawn into the story. So in conclusion, before I get into the spoiler section of the video, again, it's a film that is only going to work for certain people. Now, there are parallels with some of David Lynch's work, I think you can draw between Uzumaki and things like Twin Peaks, because it really is exploring sort of suburban life or small town life in this case, and Lynch always sort of explores the idea that there's something underneath. There's, you know, an unseen level. Everything seems nice picket fences, all that sort of stuff, but there's something else there below which is much more malevolent. In Uzumaki, that's the same case. However, it's really up to you to decide whether the malevolence is the townsfolk or whether it's an outside agent. I would really say just give it a go. Even if you end up not liking the film, you're not going to see anything else that's like it. So I think that it's worth watching just for that alone. It took me about 20 minutes to really be like, you know, because I sat down knowing nothing about the film other than a lot of people recommending it to me, and I sat down sort of just thinking, right, you know, I don't really know what this film's about, but, you know, it's J-horror, so, you know, I'm looking forward to it, and it ended up being something completely different. But you just persevere with it, first 20 minutes or so, and then you find your rhythm within the film, if there is a rhythm. So if you hate it, then at least it's an experience. So I would say it's a must watch, especially for those who enjoy Asian horror films. Okay, so this is the spoiler section of the video, so that means if you haven't watched Uzumaki, go away, watch it, then come back and watch this bit of the video, because really, you know, you don't want to ruin the film for yourself. Although I've noticed that a lot of reviews of this film kind of divulge exactly what happens in it. Maybe it's just people say, you know, the experience of watching it is the main thing, because the plot in essence isn't as important. I don't know, but I would suggest going and watching it first and then coming back. Now, really what we've got to first talk about is just the whole, you know, what is going on in this town. So all the townsfolk are becoming, you know, obsessed with spirals. You know, you have Shuchi's father filming the spiral from out of a snail's shell, and then of course what happens is that, well, the normal theory is that when Shuchi's father kills himself by climbing into the washing machine so that he can turn into a spiral, when he's cremated and the smoke goes up into the clouds, there then appears a massive spiral in the clouds, which then somehow affects everybody in the town, and that's how everybody starts to be affected by spirals. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think that right from the very start of the film, before Kairi sees Shuchi's father, you know, obsessed with the spiral pattern in the snail's shell, you know there's something wrong with that town. There already is something wrong with that town. Now, there is one reason why that could be. Now, the film is bookended by Kairi's eye in the shot, and she says, "Let me tell you a story." Now, we don't know what happens to Kairi's character, Kairi, at the end. We don't know what happens to her. You know, we don't know if she lives or if she dies, or if she turns into, like, you know, people turn into snails or turn into strange creatures with spirals in their hair and all sorts of things. We don't know what happens to her, but it's almost as if perhaps she is perpetually reliving the experience. So much like a spiral is something that is infinite, she is constantly looping back and telling the story, because the story ends with her saying, "I want to tell you a story again," just like the beginning of it, and we only see her eye, we don't see anything else. However, if you look at it, the colour scheme, like, she's got, you know, they've obviously used makeup, she looks like she's green, which could infer that she's dead, that she's in some sort of limbo. It could also infer that she's turned into one of the sort of strange snail-like creatures in town. I don't know, but it would make sense in some ways because, you know, she really should leave the town. You know, she's one of the only people that actually is like, you know, what's going on, and she really should get out, but she never does. And it's a shame really because it's Shuchi that tells Kairi that there's something wrong here, there's something wrong in this town. And he talks about that tunnel that he comes into that enters the town, and he says that he always has this strange feeling when he goes through it. Again, that could be kind of connected to the whole idea of the whole thing looping back on itself. Could be the sense of the sort of uncanny, you know, something strange but familiar, that they're actually reliving all of this time and time again. And at the end of the film, if the translation's right, Shuchi, when he's becoming all contorted and turning into this strange thing, says to Kairi, you know, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. Now, he could just be talking about the situation there, but it could also be a realisation that this whole event, like a spiral, just plays over and over and over and over again. And that's him saying to Kairi, you know, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, because this would just keep happening indefinitely. I don't know if that's the truth, but it's an interesting interpretation. The other point is whether the malevolence or the strangeness that's happening within the town is due to the spiral, or has the spiral been created, or is the spiral a manifestation of how strange the town is in the first place? And with regards to the film, at least, you've got no way of knowing one way or the other whether it's because of the townsfolk or the town, or whether whatever that spiral represents has come to the town and cursed it. But I think certainly that the evil, the malevolence is there right from the start of the film. It's already there, and everybody in that town, everyone in that town is already doomed. Now, just getting away from the plot for a second, some of the problems people have had with the film, for example, some of the special effects, I actually thought the special effects were fine. They sort of blend in well with the visual look of the film. I think, you know, like everything does kind of look fake, and I think that's absolutely fine. So when some of the digital effects look fake in this circumstance, because we all know that I'm really, you know, not a supporter of using computer generated images in films unless you absolutely have to. But I think that, you know, in this case, it's absolutely fine. What I loved about the film most of all is just the fact that it had a dreamlike quality, but there's something about the film which still feels like there's part of it that's grounded in reality. I think maybe it's the fact that, maybe it's the type of gore that's used in some of the more horrific scenes, I'm not sure, but it feels connected enough to reality to leave that horrible sort of feeling of the uncanny that I talked about, something that's familiar but unfamiliar, and it just creates a real sense of foreboding while you're watching it, and I think it's a brilliant film. I really do. I'll be watching it again, absolutely, and I think that perhaps the people who love the manga, who then watch the film, were really disappointed in it. What I would say is just think of it as two different things. You know, it was the same when I watched Lord of the Rings. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, and there's a lot of things cut out of the films and things that were changed, but I still loved the films because they were true to the spirit of it, I suppose. But I always kind of looked on it as its own thing. It's the same with The Shining. You know, The Shining is one of my favourite horror books, you know, Stephen King. And when I went to watch the Stanley Kubrick film, initially I didn't like it because I was like, it should be the book. But, you know, really, both are phenomenal. You know, The Shining's a fantastic film, so just try and enjoy it for what it is. If then you don't enjoy it, then fair enough, but don't prejudice yourself against it because you've already read the source material. It's a film that everyone should try, like I said earlier on, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's just a peculiar ride. You know, it's just a weird film, but if you're into things like David Lynch, if you're into perhaps even things like Argento's work, then I think there'll be a lot within the film that you will enjoy. And if you're into Japanese horror, then you'll get something that's really different, really stands out from the pack. So anyway, definitely recommend it. I'd like to thank MonkeyTube for suggesting this film to me. This is part of a double bill. I will be reviewing I Saw the Devil, which is another film that MonkeyTube suggested to me. But the next film up I'll be reviewing is within my Amicus review series that I'm going through at the moment. That'll be Tales from the Crypt, the 1972 anthology horror film. Let me know what you guys think of Uzumaki and anything else, and check out the forums below. And that's about it, so thanks for getting through this video with me. I don't know why I did that. I'm always ending these videos in a really stupid way.